turned now to face what had just ripped me into a nightmare, only to find my concept of a nightmare had been childishly underestimated. The spines. I'd seen them on the back of the hand that grabbed me, but now that my eyes were adjusting to the light, and I'd blinked away many of the tears that had formed from the pain in my arm, I could see clearly that there were 4 to 5 inch spikes sticking out from its flesh on nearly every point of its body. That the spines on this thing Gingerly, I got up from the floor and backed myself towards the entrance, never taking my eyes off the stairs in case that thing came charging back down them. I felt behind me for the wall and eventually made contact with it, blindly running my hands along its surface. I searched for the handle, but continued to feel nothing but smooth wood. Getting nowhere, I risked a look behind me to find the door, but was met with yet another shock. It had vanished. I could flag down someone from the street to help me, but my street was not outside those windows. I don't know what I'd expected. I'd been pulled into a home not my own, and could then see that the world outside was not the one I'd left behind earlier. The world outside didn't even appear to be in the same season as the one I'd come from. Thick snow blanketed the ground in a sea of trees that stretched further than my eye could discern. Somehow I'd traveled from summertime in suburbia to a winter forest in an instant. What little buzz I'd had going before leaving my house that morning was fading rapidly, and I was not going to be able to contain my terror much longer. Feeling that fleeing on foot through the woods would be better than exploring any deeper into the house and possibly running into even more terrible creatures, I tried to pry open the window I was looking out of, but it wouldn't move. I searched for a lock that might be holding it shut, or nails, or screws, anything that could prevent it from letting me out, but there was nothing that I could locate. Throwing all caution away, I started to punch and kick the window, following my body's instinctual desire to run, but it seemed nothing I did could crack the glass. Overtaken by dread, I forgot even the fear that the monster I'd already met would come soon to devour me, and yelled for someone. Anyone to help me. Well, I smashed my body into the panes. Eventually, I even tried to throw a chair through it, and it did nothing more than break the chair into pieces. And it was when I did this that I heard a voice behind me curse in a thick French accent. It took me weeks to mend that last time. It snapped. I shouted and jumped back against the wall, after finding a waif of a man behind me, dressed in the remains of what had possibly been business attire at one time. He previously had a mustache, but now above his lips were a few tufts of unkept mange, and much of the gray, matted hair on his head looked to have been yanked out. His teeth were rotting, and his skin browed with dirt, but not enough to cover the needle marks in both of his arms. A junkie. Where am I? What do you want? I blurted at the man, who threw a finger in front of his mouth and shushed me threateningly. I want you to shut up and quit breaking stuff. He doesn't like when we fight, he whispered ominously, eyes darting to the second floor. I dropped my voice lower. Who are you? What is it? What is this place? I asked. He indicated himself, am Henry Laurent. This, he gestured to the room around him, is the Winter House. And it, he pointed up the stairs where the creature had disappeared, is the house. And the house is it. He was speaking nonsense, clearly high on whatever he'd shot into his veins. My face must have shown my distaste for his BS when I was clearly in distress. As he smiled and continued, "You think I messed up in spouting gibberish at you, no?" He gave a quiet chuckle. I thought the same thing when Bo explained it to me, but he tried to, gently, deliver the news. I feel it's easiest for you to hear the blunt truth. You'll come to accept it more quickly that way. Accept what? I inquired. That you are dead, he said nonchalantly. I'm dead? I snapped involuntarily. Not quite yet exactly, but you will never leave here alive. Think of this place as a sort of purgatory, a miserable purgatory. He trailed off. Please, I pleaded with him. I just want to go home. Can you help me get out of here? Were you not listening? He quipped. You cannot leave. No one leaves the house once it has them. It brought you here to feed on you, and there will never let you go. Fine, he sighed. Would you like me to show you to your room? I did not want Henry to show me anywhere. I wanted to wake up. I tried to slap myself several times, but only found Henry's laughing face staring back at me each time that I did. Follow me. He made a motion behind him and walked towards the stairs. Come, there is something in your room that will make this easier. I saw no reasonable alternatives. I could continue to try and smash unbreakable windows and find an invisible door, or I could follow Henry to my room. Being I was unwilling to explore any of the rest of the house alone, so trepidatiously, I accompanied him. Henry showed me up to the second floor, which comprised a single hallway that led straight back to a door at the end, with 3 others branching off on the sides. The warden lives down there. He pointed to the door at the end of the hall. I'm in here. He threw a thumb towards the first door on the left. Bo's in there. He jabbed a finger to the second door on the left, and that leaves you in here. We stopped in front of the only door on the right-hand side of the hall. I opened my mouth to ask him more questions, including why he referred to the creature as the warden, but he shushed me for a second time. Just go in and get your head right. I'll explain how it all works. Well, at least what's been passed to me, and a little I understand of it. Once you've taken the edge off a bit, he gave an encouraging nod towards the door, and I opened to see a small and rather shabby room. My initial reaction was that it had no redeeming qualities whatsoever, and I was unsure what Henry was referring to as something that would help inside. A small cot, one might generously call a bed, sat under a window on the right-hand side with a mirror facing it from the opposite wall. On the left, there was a putrid-looking toilet, and the only other furniture was a small nightstand which was barren except for a glass of whiskey. The adrenaline had been masking it, but now that my body no longer felt it was in imminent threat of death, the withdrawal symptoms were encroaching and the pain in my elbow was peaking. I don't recall entering the room or walking to the edge of the bed. All I know is 1 second I was at the entry with Henry, and the next I was holding the glass in my hand, hesitating and remembering the many warnings I'd been given during my life to not accept strange food or drinks. I turned back towards the door, expecting Henry to be there, providing affirmation that it was okay to take a sip. But he'd gone. Instead, I was startled by the touch of another hand on the one that was holding the drink. A gentle hand. Sherry's hand. My body was frozen by its presence, other than the arm she was guiding. She pushed the glass towards my mouth, and from behind me, she cooed when it reached my lips. It's okay, baby. You need this. So I drank. It was a pale imitation of the quality of the invitation, warm and with a flavor more reminiscent of top-shelf booze than the transcendent experience I'd had the previous night. However, in that moment, it was everything that I craved. My body relaxed the instant the liquid touched my tongue, and while the powerful ecstasy did not return either, the calming effect was exquisite. Even the pain in my elbow receded. Though the high was muted from what I knew was possible, it was still enough for me to beg for more, and my wish was granted. I stood, rooted in place, while Sherry's hands nudged me for 2 more helmets, and while I considered that it could have contributed to my intoxication level increasing, I couldn't help the winter house, so called by its tenants for the perpetual season it resided in. Lacking insulation, it was always cold within the walls, and as I learned with any discomfort there, the only respite could be found on the table in my room. Hunger, thirst, tiredness, cold, boredom, depression, fear, even arousal. Alcohol was all the house lent for me to cope. For Henry, it was the needle. For Beau, pills. The human body behaved differently within its confines than it did in the outside world. One could not starve there or dehydrate, though the sensations of needing food or drink would become overpowering if you tried to stop consuming your vice. And it was not possible to overdose, but rather overindulge would merely bring a relief, restless sleep, carrying with it only nightmares and painful memories. All residents, male and female, found themselves impotent there. Not that desire was removed, it could just only be managed with narcotics or drink. And while we were not discouraged from interacting with one another or leaving our rooms, were free to converse and roam as we pleased, I quickly learned that addicts made poor conversationalists, and there was no more to the house to discover beyond the dining room, sitting room, and our bedrooms. No kitchen, no library with books, or living room with television. One afternoon, I asked Henry why the house even bothered with the dining table we were sitting at, being we didn't need to eat, or a couch being we had no entertainment to enjoy on it. Reminders, he told me. Reminders of what? I responded. Of the lives we left behind, of a meal with family, of a movie night with a lover. The house is clever. If it just trapped us, alone in our rooms, and forced us to use all day and night, no one would last more than a few weeks here. But it lets us talk. It lets us come downstairs and see a sunrise, sit at the table and imagine being back in our own homes, at our own tables. And in doing so, it lets us keep a fraction of hope alive, a sliver of a dream that we'll make it out of here someday, allowing it to savor its meals for longer. He paused. But no one can hold out indefinitely. The door will return soon. I do not think Beau will last much longer. He cared for Alice. He was not the same after she left. He dropped his face into his hands and said the last few words through his fingers. Beau had not emerged since I'd arrived at the house nearly 4 weeks earlier. I'd initially surmised that Henry had made him up, having been driven mad by his 3-month stay there, consuming nothing but heroin. But sometimes at night, I'd hear movement from Beau's room, or a moan of anguish, confirming his reality. The door will return? I asked. Yes. Once an invitation has been sent, the door will materialize, but an invitation cannot be sent until a room has opened. His voice faltered slightly near the end. And how does a room open? I pressed. I told you on your first day here, you will not leave here alive. He shrugged. So I'll just keep drinking until the alcohol finally kills me? The house had chosen well if that was its goal, given I'd already decided to do that the night that it invited me in. No. He stood from the chair and walked towards one of the front windows before continuing. No, it will not let your vice take you quietly. Your body will not eventually just give up, nor will you be able to overdose, as you are aware already. Your body will rot from the inside, and you will feel pain, unbearable pain, but you will not die. So you're saying, I believed I knew where you was going, but wasn't ready to speak it aloud myself. Yes, if you want this to end, if you want to leave here, you will have to end things yourself, violently, painfully. It knows that you want to die, that's why it brought you here. It knows that you'd given up on fighting your addiction, and were just going to passively drink yourself to death. That's why it targeted you. It's why it targeted me, Rainbow, and Alice, and the hundreds of others that occupied all of our rooms before us. We are its favorite meal. Those so unwilling to seek help or feel our pain that we'd rather mask it until we simply expire. If our addiction is its dinner, our suffering its seasoning, and our deaths are its dessert. You will find that one day, when you begin to wish to die more than to alive, the house will change. It won't send your wife to put a glass in your hand. It'll send her to hang a noose. Tears were welling in his eyes. Bo warned me it would happen. Alice had been looking worse and worse for weeks. Her skin and eyes yellowed. She said her son had been telling her that it was time, and then one day she stopped coming out of her room and we heard something kicked over. Choking, gagging, silence, and Christ, I can't. He wiped his face with his soiled shirt. Overnight the door formed. I tried to open it, of course, but it was locked. It needed a key. He finished. I was feeling sick to my stomach, something I knew I could easily fix by heading back to my room, but I wanted to know more, so I asked, "What do you mean, the key?" "You will see soon. I do not think my description would do it justice." And with that, he headed back up the stairs to shoot up. Henry refused to say more on the subject when I inquired further, but I did not need to wait long for answers. It was just a couple nights later when I was laying in my bed and powering through enough whiskey to knock myself out for a few hours, that I heard the same sounds Henry had described from Alice's demise coming from Beau's room. Something climbing on top of something. A chair being kicked over. Choking. I tried to block it out. Even covered my ears with my pillow. But it forced me to listen. To hear every agonizing gurgle of Beau's final moments. To foreshadow what it had planned for me. Somehow amplifying every excruciating detail directly into my brain. Yet as traumatic as it was to eavesdrop on another man hanging himself, Henry had not prepared me for the noises that would soon permeate the walls. Maybe it had been too horrible for him to wish to recount. First, it was the door at the end of the hallway bursting open, followed by the heavy clunks of the warden moving towards Beau's door, and finally the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor, being dragged back to its lair. Then, squelching, crunching, chewing. Again, I tried to obscure the sounds, but it was no use. So, as I'd been trained to do, I reached for my glass, only to find that, for the first time, it was empty. The house was not going to give me anything to dull the moment, and I knew it had done the same to Henry when I heard his anguished screams blending with the chorus of consumption. I considered running from my room, but was too terrified to what I'd see, as I had not heard the warden's door close behind it. There was nothing I could do but wait, and shake and cry and vomit. The house relished in its dessert, relished in every second of our combined despair, until silence fell again. A weight pressed down on the bed beside me, and as I turned to see Sherry holding the glass in her hand, talked mercifully of salvation. "It's okay, baby. You can have this now," she purred. I hungrily pulled the drink from her and poured it down my throat. "That's That's it. It's okay. Your age is away from that. You still have so much left to give me. Rest now. And she was gone again, only there to feign comfort, only there to imitate compassion, a phantom that if Henry was to be believed, when I was all used up, would walk me to self-imposed gallows. I had avoided it to that time, but I could not help a glance in the mirror to see what I'd become, and was appalled with the man reflected back at me. The fat had melted from my cheeks, and deep bags sat below bloodshot eyes. What color had remained of my hair was now replaced with gray, and the majority of it had receded. I looked like the face of a dying man. The house could not refill my glass quickly enough that night, and eventually I collapsed back onto the bed, preferring the nightmares I might find in my dreams to the one before me. The following day, I did not leave my room until I heard Henry venture from his, which was after nightfall, and I only did so cautiously. The door was opened. Upon finding it shut, though he spoke calmly, his face appeared to have aged years overnight. Well, he had not indicated to me that Beau was a friend, or that they were close in any way. I knew from his stories that Beau had been there since Henry had arrived. With Beau's death, I wondered if Henry was considering how long it would be before the house would take him too. How will we know if it's been accepted? I asked, trying to focus the subject on anything other than the events of the previous night. The warden will make a key, came his cryptic response. What do you mean, it'll make a key? I annoyedly followed up. You will see soon, he said, before reaching forward to try the knob. It was, as he indicated it would be, locked. I tried it myself, though it might have remained a wall for all the success I had. But I was not completely deterred. I studied the lock, wondering if I might be able to find something laying around that I could use to pick at. Yet, it was unlike anything I'd seen before. In fact, it looked to me as if it were still waiting for a key to be designed for it. Still, I thought it might be worth a shot to see if I could get it to turn. And finding a nail on the floor, I stuck it into the opening. Immediately the nail glowed orange and burned my fingers before melting to the floor. Henry chuckled while I shook my singed skin through the frigid air. I guess I must applaud you for trying, but this door can only be opened by one of the warden's keys. He snorted. So, we just need to steal one of those then, right? I asked. He laughed harder. Well, if only it were that simple, my friend. His mirth was cut short when a bang came from upstairs. Henry exclaimed. We had no time to react. It was only in that brief flash that I truly appreciated how small the house was compared to the size of the warden. In what must have been seconds, it made its way from its room down the stairs and had grabbed us both around the ankles. Then it madly dragged us by our legs, smashing our bodies step by step, up to the second floor before unceremoniously throwing each of us into our respective rooms. And as I lay there, certain I'd broken several ribs in the journey, I heard it tear back down the stairs, screeching horribly as it did, clearly in terrible distress. Reaching for my whiskey to numb the pain in my chest, I next tiptoed to my door to see what was going on below, and when I made it to the hallway, I saw that Henry was leaning out from his room, a fresh needle mark in his arm, to watch the scene unfolding downstairs as well. Down on the first floor, the warden's shrieks became more and more intense as it slammed itself around, pounding on the walls, charging to and fro. Confused, I wondered briefly if it was trying to escape when suddenly it stopped just in front of the door, holding one of its hands out before its face. There, in the palm, a spike was forcing its way out, exactly like the ones that covered the rest of its body, A pointed bone jammed through its skin before, slowly, the tip began to form into a jagged but methodical shape. A key. I couldn't believe I didn't recognize them before, but I had only seen the warden the one time previously, and my eyes had been somewhat clouded by painful tears. The spines protruding from its skin were not tipped with venomous points, but with keys. Hundreds of keys. Various shapes and sizes dating back to locking mechanisms in the early 1800s. I understood then why Henry had thought the idea of stealing a key from the warden to be so humorous. One would literally need to be snapped off of its body. The warden continued to bellow until the key finished glowing and taking shape before it fell silent again. And then, he waited. Patiently it hovered in front of the door, anticipating something that did not come until well after the sun rose the following morning, when a noise I recognized all too well met my ears. The turning of a key in a lock from outside the house. I watched then, as the warden inserted the newly formed key in its palm into the lock on the door and, pausing but for a moment, rotated it to the unlocked position. Silently I screamed in my head for the person on the other side to run away, to not be as stupid as I was to crack the door open. But it was no use. I saw the knob turn. The warden hid behind the door as it crept open, and I observed in the opening a man confusedly scanning the space before his eyes. There, behind him, was a rainy street with cars splashing through puddles, and I considered for an instant, sprinting down the steps and diving out to freedom. Yet before I could start my legs, the warden reached through, just as it had for me, and yanked the man inside. He was forcefully smashed to the ground, and I heard something snap as he began to wail in pain and fear. But I was not watching him. I was watching the warden slam the door behind him, watching it remove its hand from the lock and the key retract into its palm, watching a new quill spring up in the forest on the creature's back, and watching the door dissolve once again into a solid wall. The warden circled the new arrival once before climbing the stairs again, and my first inclination was to withdraw into my room before it passed by, but I was overcome with an impulse that I could not ignore, a wildly stupid impulse. As it lumbered by my door, I waited until its back right leg was set down in front of me. Then I reached forward, wrapped my fingers around one of the spines on its ankle, and snapped it off. It howled with shock and pain, whipped around, and struck me with such force that I was knocked clear across the room and into the wall. Something cracked in my back, and I was met with the worst agony in all my days. I was sure that the warden was going to come in and crush more of my bones, but its head just hovered in the doorway. It looked to the key I held in my hand and observed the anguish on my face before simply turning away and continuing back to the table. Perplexed, I could not believe that it allowed me to keep the key, wondering why it had not pursued to wrench it from my grasp. But when I looked down, I solved the mystery quickly. The spine in my hand was only that, a spine. The key had not been intricately carved out of its point when I removed it from the warden's leg only moments before. It was smoothed out. It was useless. And my back was broken. A fine reward for my brazen idiocy. I screamed from the torment racking my nerves, but also to the futility of my situation. For a brief second, I allowed myself to believe there was a way out, to believe I was not going to waste away for months, to hang myself, to be eaten by a monster. Henry left his room once the warden was safely locked away, and paused at my door long enough to say, "You are a moron," before heading down to the first floor to attempt and calm the new arrival. He had explained to me already that we could not enter each other's rooms, so I knew he could do nothing to help me. But his lack of empathy still stung on top of everything else. At least I I tried to do something to get us out of there, rather than just waiting for the house to consume us. You're a very naughty boy, William. Sherry's mocking voice cut in, as I felt the glass slip into my hand. Drink up. That back is going to take a long time to heal. You'll need a lot of this. It was 2 days before I was able to move from the floor. The drink helped with the recovery, but only enough that I could get to my bed where I remained for the next week. From my convalescence, I could hear Henry trying to communicate with our new tenant, Manuel, but they had not made much progress yet. Henry spoke French and English, and Manuel only Spanish. While I was confused, I had nothing but time to think, and I delved firstly into why I'd done what I'd done to begin with. Why was I even searching for a way out of the house, when the house was giving me exactly what I wanted before it brought me there? All I had to do within its walls was drink and die. It even removed all other worries from the outside world. Bills, food, injury, work. The house provides. So then, why the impulse to survive? Why the drive to escape? Was it just that I could not stomach the idea of dangling myself from a noose? Or was it that, by forcing me to listen to Beau's death, by refusing to let me be deaf to his final consumption, the house had inadvertently spoken my will to live? Whatever the case, as I lay in that bed, I resolved to go home. And I believed had accepted the invitation, we'd given a piece of ourselves back to the house, a piece which it used to create the key and bridge the divide into our world. It was a theory, obviously, but if I was to hold on to any hope of surviving the nightmare, it was one that I needed to believe in. The key was created equally by me and by the house, and only its makers could use it to access the outside world. And while I had firm faith that my key would retain its form in my hands, I had two major issues to overcome. The first was finding my key amongst the hundreds the warden retained on its body. Though I was certain I could recognize the cuts that I personally designed, it would take careful and close inspection for me to locate it. The second, and no less daunting, would come after I'd discovered it. That was how to remove it and fit it into the door without the warden mangling my body. Over the next several days, a plan took shape in my mind, a plan that would require the help of Henry and Manuel. Neither man was very keen on my proposal when I shared it with them after finally recovering enough to leave my room. Manuel could not understand much of it, but he gleaned enough from the conversation to surmise that it was very dangerous. Henry simply thought it would never work. Around the splintered table and our three ramshackle chairs cobbled together by a bored and restless Henry, we discussed my fantastical plan for escape. "You're going to get us killed," Henry said. "I don't think so," I replied. "I don't think the warden will take it that far. You forget what you told me on my first day here. It is the house, and the house is it. Remember? It doesn't want to take our lives. It wants us to do that ourselves. Otherwise it can't savor its meal the way it wants to. Break us, sure. I have first-hand experience with that one. But we can recover from those injuries quickly here and try again." While our vices did speed the recovery process, they also never allowed the damage to our bodies to fully heal. My elbow still bothered me daily, and the destruction of my back.
It's art for performance, crafted for comfort.
It's Sunday.
The Sunday collection is versatility at its finest.
every move agonizingly tedious. I'd also noticed that every drink the house gave me was weaker than the last. It was very slowly working to wear me down and increase my suffering, but I was willing to weather significant pain if it would afford us the chance at freedom. Even if that's true, you'll never find your key, Henry quipped. But I was confident that I could. I would just need their assistance. The warden rarely emerged, so there would normally be few opportunities to search in, yet Henry had said that it would come out to separate us if we tried to murder one another, as it would be a wasted meal too, if we were to die by each other's hands. So in my mind, it was a simple proposition. We would need to fight one another, often, brutally, seriously. We would need to be convincing enough that the house would have to intervene, and while the warden was punishing us, I would have a window for an up-close inspection of its hoard. It took several days to convince my compatriots to join my resistance. I believe Henry capitulated as his own mortality weighed on him more and more by the hour. Manuel, I think, was simply afraid and looking for anything to distract him from the bleak world he'd been unwillingly forced into. In all actuality, I did not necessarily need their endorsement for my plan to progress. I could have just as easily attacked either of them without permission, but I felt that if they did not know why I was doing it, they might ambush me someday and quickly finish me off before the warden could stop them. As well, my conscience just would not let me keep it a secret from them, especially considering the second piece of my strategy. I dreaded discussing it, and was hoping I might be able to leave it as something to be sorted later, but Henry figured it out on his own. But of course, this is only half an idea. Even if you can locate your key, and even if you could remove it from the warden, you would need the door to return to use it. And for the door to return, one of us must die, Henry somberly stated. And as you believe you must be the one to wield your key, it must be either me or Manuel. I could not look him in the eye when I replied with a quiet, yes. Manuel caught on, and holding up a couple fingers said, only two? Yes, I added. Only two of us will be able to leave, and I must be one of them. Once I locate the key, we'll need to wait for the door to return, and once it's arrived, we'll stage one more fight. When the warden attacks me, I'll snap the key off, and one other spine so it will, hopefully, only see the one that isn't mine turn into a useless spike. Well, in the confusion, I stash the real one in my pocket. Then when it leaves us alone again, whatever state we're in, we'll drag ourselves to the door. All let us out, and we're home free. That's all we've got, I concluded. Though, while the pain sounded straightforward enough on paper, it turned out to be much more difficult in practice. Henry's body was deteriorating rapidly. All of ours were, really, as we had to continue to use our vices in order to get through the day. Especially considering that if we did not, we became so sick and weak that we would not have the energy or strength to convincingly try to kill one another. However, Henry was so far gone already that, on our first attempt, I broke several of his ribs with a half-hearted punch before the warden fractured his skull. It was a brutal game we played. Desperately in each trial, I scanned the warden for the telltale cuts of my key, but the warden was fast and violent. Still, we were undaunted. We tried again and again, with Manuel and I taking the brunt of the punishments as Henry took far longer to recover than either of us. Then, after 4 months and countless failed attempts in which I suffered innumerable injuries, included a crushed foot, broken arm, broken nose, several deep gashes, and a dislocated shoulder, Henry stopped emerging from his room entirely. I tried to speak with him through the door, urged him to carry on. I promised him that we were close, and that he could maybe go home soon, but it was too late. I could hear him speaking softly in his final hours. Okay, yes, you're right. I'm ready. It's too much. I'm ready. He had never told me who it was that haunted his room, but I knew there was a loved one in there, someone that he trusted, convincing him that it was time for him to die. The house had squeezed every ounce of life from him that it cared to take. The meal was finished, and it was ready for its dessert. I care not to describe the sounds of that evening again, but suffice to say they will never leave my ears. Henry was not someone I would have called a friend, but he had been there since my very first day, and his passing was difficult for me to stomach. With his loss, I felt the walls of the house closing in on me ever more. However, as bleak as the morning following Henry's death was, there was one macabre upside to his demise. When I went downstairs to inspect, I found Manuel standing in the living room staring at the space between the two front windows, where the door had materialized once again. Manuel turned to face me, and I could see from his mostly vacant gaze and the bloodshot eyes that he'd likely swallowed an entire bottle of pills after the house had finished with Henry. Yet, buried beneath the stupor of there appeared a determination which I had not reckoned away. I raised myself to my feet and braced for the onslaught I was sure would be rained down upon me momentarily. Then, swiftly, I threw my hands forward, wrapping my right around the base of the spine, tipped with my key, and left around a random second. With a twist of my wrists, I snapped both of them clean from its body in one motion, and I was met instantly with a backwards kick to the diaphragm. The blast sent me through the air 10 feet across the room, the shock of which knocked the decoy from my left hand, but miraculously, I managed to hold on to the true one in my right, working to recover my breath yet again, having had it knocked from me by the powerful shot to the chest, and blinking the stars from my eyes brought on from the slam of my head against the ground when I landed. I cautiously looked upon the item I gripped tightly in my palm. The key remained at the tip. I had precious little time to celebrate, however, as the warden had rounded on me. It directed its wicked focus to what I'd stolen from it, and my planned subterfuge was thwarted instantaneously. We would not be able to slip out quietly like I'd hoped. It was now or never. Where I'd fallen, I was directly in front of the army. A gentle summer breeze met skin that had not felt warmth in months. I breathed in the miraculous smell of fresh cut grass as I spun and reached for Manuel's hand. Hobbled as he was, I did not want to lose time trying to get him to his feet to limp out, and instead began yanking to drag him through the opening behind me. But the warden had finally been able to pull the intrusion from its face and recovered. Witnessed that we were nearly free of it. It latched onto Manuel's broken leg and pulled him the opposite direction of me. Back into the house. Back into hell. I tried with every ounce of fortitude left in my emaciated body to heave him loose of its grip, but it was of no use. Slowly Manuel's hand slipped through my fingers. The last my eyes met his, I tried to wordlessly let him know how sorry I was, tried to thank him for all he'd done, tried to find any measure of forgiveness in his expression, but all I saw was fear and pleading for me not to leave him behind. Yet I knew that it was over. There was nothing more I could do for him. If I did not leave then, neither of us would be getting out. So, too fearful of that prospect, and truly hating myself for it, I turned away from Manuel. I pulled the key from the lock, I stepped through the portal, and I slammed the door behind me. It's been 2 years since my stay in the winter house, and up to this writing, I had not shared the details of my time there with anyone. Who would have believed me anyways? The instant the door had closed, the key turned to dust in my hand, and though I was confident the bridge between this world and there was broken, I did not dare immediately check whether the door now opened to my house or its. With the only evidence of my experience being my extensive injuries and significant liver damage, I chose to explain those as having been acquired through a lengthy bender, and having lived on the streets for the few months that I'd been missing. Even considering an attempt to explain the truth of what had happened to me filled me with terror, guilt, and shame. I convinced myself that no good could come from it. Barely alive, the first 2 weeks after my return were spent in a hospital being pumped with nutrients and receiving several considerable surgeries to begin to correct some of the damage to my body. And luckily, with several months of treatment and a few more surgeries, my prognosis for a full recovery was good. It was not until my return from the initial stay in the hospital that I first opened my door again, which, bringing with it a powerful wave of relief, revealed behind it my living room, just as I'd left it those months before. Upon entering, the first thing that I did was dump out the remnants of the whiskey I'd purchased on the night I'd relapsed, the only glimmer of positivity from the whole experience being that it strengthened the resolve in my sobriety. I told myself that I would never touch another drop, that I would live the rest of my life trying to help other addicts reach recovery, that I would keep as many away from the winter house that I could, as I know it's still out there. I know it's just on the other side of the door waiting for me. It knows I have my moments of weakness. It knows I suffer, and it hungers for my return. I'm writing this now to remind myself of the horrors it put me through. I'm writing it so that I never forget the torment I endured at its hands, because its temptations are difficult to resist. For the last several nights, when I've laid my head down to sleep, I've been greeted with the sound of tinkling in a glass. The invitation rests beside me, waiting for me to accept it. I'm flooded with the memory of euphoria it contains, and the unbridled ecstasy I could experience once again. A familiar, chill air seeps through me, and Sherry's whispers meet my ears. Oh, baby, I've missed you. It's okay. Just take it. Come back home. Let me just start this by saying, if you're looking for a big confrontation or a satisfying conclusion, I'm sorry, but I don't have one. I am a junior in a university in a small town in northern British Columbia. The population is no larger than 200 people. It's currently summer break, and I'm working at the only grocery store in town as a stock boy to save up some extra cash for the upcoming semester. The store was open and ran by a local family called the McLeans. The founder, Jim, took over the store 30 years ago after the local superstore decided to sell it to the family after about 10 years of making no money. After Jim retired, he left the store in the hands of his two sons, Rob and Carl. I think Carl handles the business side, accounting and marketing, stuff like that. But Rob is the day-to-day store supervisor. As an employee, I almost never see Carl. The few times I have met him, he seems nice enough, if not distant. And when he's around Rob, he gets quiet and looks extremely uncomfortable. That isn't out of the ordinary, though. Spend enough time around Rob and you'll wish you had him. It's hard to describe, but have you ever met anyone who's really nice and polite on the surface, but you look into their eyes and just feel deep unease for a reason you can't quite put your finger on? That's Rob. The store is the only place in town where people, mostly senior citizens, can do their grocery shopping. The store itself is definitely the largest building in town, but that's not saying much since we all have to compete with a gas station. At the edge of our parking lot and a Chinese food restaurant that's been there seemingly since before documented human history. The rest of the town is just houses, sheds, a single baseball diamond, and outdoor hockey rink. A few kilometers out of town is the sawmill that employs 95% of the population of our town. In fact, my dad works there, and his dad worked there, and his dad's dad also worked there. My father is utterly confused as to why I chose to go to a fancy general studies course at the University of British Columbia instead of taking up the family tradition of back-breaking labor for 30 years straight. The only claim to fame we have here is the murders that happened here a little over a year ago. Not much has been released to the public because the investigation is still ongoing, but word spreads like wildfire in small towns like this. The few young people living here like to make their own theories because this is by far the most exciting thing that's happened here since the town's inception. I personally don't like to talk about that stuff because frankly it freaks me out. The little information I know about the case is basically local legend and the occasional news updates on the store. Rob doesn't really care about the presentation of products because we are the only grocery store in town. Why would we need to show off with immaculate displays of perfect shelving? So it's not uncommon going down the aisles that things will be in the wrong place or flipped around or whatever. That is except for one part of the store. We don't really have a toys section, but we do have an aisle of dolls. All kinds of them, from Barbie dolls to Raggedy Ann dolls.